Okay, so I'm going to kick off. So first, thanks to Barry and the crew for hosting this and having me here today to talk to all of you. I know Barry and Jade are not here, but thank you in your absence for setting this up. Wonderful to get to talk to you all today. I'm going to do this as follows. Today, I'm going to introduce myself really briefly so you understand my context. Then I'm going to talk about some of the most important things that I see coming up again and again, both in my own companies and in the startups that I work with as an advisor and a board member when it comes to product metrics. And I will endeavor to try and leave some time for questions at the end. I'm also going to try and keep an eye on chat. I might miss it, but feel free to drop a message in the chat if you've got questions. Worst case is I might not get to it. Best case is I'll stop and answer it. So thank you, everybody. Really good to have you all here today. So really quickly on me. So I'm Nick. I'm a former founder, chief product officer, and over the last few years have been an advisor to startups going from about 25 to 250 people, which is the spot that I absolutely love. My role there is to partner really closely with the founders to help turn their vision into a reality. And that reality can mean the go-to-market plan. That reality can mean the hiring. That reality can mean, and it often ends up meaning, the product, how we construct a product organization, how we get the right metrics in place, and so on. So over the last few years, I've done this with some pretty fun companies. The early stage, a company called Cora here in the UK, who recently raised a very nice 4 million investment to address the 30 million UK motorists. Done very similar to, in fact, a lot of the work I'm doing today. I did the same with a company called Rain, who is a US-based earned wage access app, where we added 100 engineers in about 90 days to their team, which was only about 100 when we started, and leading up to a fundraise. So, oh, Mark says he can't hear me. Can anybody else not hear me? Anyone having problems? No, cool. Maybe turn up a bit. Let me know, yeah, cool. So worked with them on setting their North Star metric, their strategy, and then working out the organization, how they were going to organize their teams in the lead up to a very big fundraise. And I also do quite a bit with private equity as well, where amazingly, even at the point where you've got thousands of people in your company and you exit for a big number and you've got big GMV, you still have many of these same problems when it comes to organizing product teams and getting the right metrics, as you see in startups of 50 people. And that stunned me when I started working with private equity. I had massive imposter syndrome. So I'd never worked in a company bigger than a few hundred people, and I was in these thousands of people company. Same problems, same problems. So what I'm going to focus on today is the solutions to these. The background I'm coming from, my own startup was a company called CloudMade, which was in the automotive space. We scaled up to about 150 people, exited that in 2016 to a French parts supplier to the automotive industry. And my role there was as a founder and chief product officer, and I really sat, as you often do in B2B, between product and sales. So equally working with the customers to understand their requirements and really to sell what we had, and building a product team that was able to build on those rather tough requirements that those customers have. We built a pretty cool product. You know, this is about products, so it's good to share. That is, of course, what I'm passionate about, is building, getting product out there. And I tend to look for companies that have a similar kind of spark in their eye when we talk about the outcome of the thing that we're building. So enough about me. That's it. Done on me. Back to metrics. So I'm going to cover today North Star metrics, a bit about how they fit into product strategy, how that links into building an empowered product organization, something I'm very keen on, and then a little bit of a touch on using OKRs the right way. We could do a whole hour session on OKRs, so it's just a light touch. And I'm really going to try and get some Q&A as well. Before we do that, I'd like to get to know you a bit so I know who I'm talking to here. So I just threw up a poll. If you would mind answering that, and we can see who we got in the room. Okay. 15 people responding. Thank you. Really fast responses. Right, I'll let it run for a couple of seconds. We get everyone's responses in. It's when we find out we've got a room full of investors who came to the wrong thing, right? Okay. Here are the results. Can you see the results? Good, good. So lots of non-founder CTOs, wonderful. Some founders as well. I guess you're probably founder CTOs. My box doesn't count for that. And we've got a nice spread here. Okay, so you're at various different company stages. We've really got a spread of things. So I'll try and keep all of this in mind. If you were at other, do you mind just tapping into the chat if you put other, what your job is for other? That really helps me a lot. Head of Eng. Okay, cool. So that helps me set things. Thank you. I'm going to do a few polls as we go through. Okay, so this is what I learned about metrics as a very naive 26-year-old founder. So I was building a developer platform back in 2007, 2008. So it was a location-based service platform for developers to build apps on top of using Maps APIs, kind of analogous to Google Maps. Now, of course, this is basically what my data looked like. We had a whole range of APIs. And one of these was kind of spiking, this blue line here. And I went into a board meeting and I said to the board member, yeah, there is some good news there, but I'm actually more worried about these lines that aren't moving because, we're trying to build a platform and this doesn't look like a platform. And the board member said, Nick, you're being negative. You need to be way more, you need to be positive. You should take a compliment when you get it, et cetera, et cetera. So thinking that the board member probably knew what he was talking about, I backed off a little bit. And of course, what happened? Well, the only line that grew was one of them, and that's one API request being hit. And one API does not make a platform, right? The whole point of a platform business, you have a broad range of different APIs that are being used. If there was only 2 APIs in all of Windows or the iPhone that were used, they would not be a successful platform. So, of course, I was blamed by that same board member for the non-performance in the next board meeting, which is a whole different lesson. But what I should have done here was be much more honest about my metrics. I had a vanity metric. So what I did here was put something out there, build a tool, see who used it, see how it was used, and then I just tracked the best used metric. And that really failed because it failed to capture a strategy. It failed to capture any reason why those particular services were being used and the other ones weren't being used. So it ended up being a pure vanity metric, which really cost me many years of growth down the line when I had to fix all of this. And in the sort of panic that ensued to fix this, when we realized that we had, we were building a product that was a sort of mile wide and an inch deep, the panic that ensued, I went out and talked to a lot of other founders and people in tech. And I learned this, that most teams out there do this. They have an idea, they build some stuff, they try some stuff, and they measure the results. And that's what we call data-driven development. But the really successful teams out there, they're doing something different. They're doing this. They're deciding what impact they want to have. They're identifying the metrics that drive that impact. And then they're building loads of different things until they find the one that drives that impact. And this is a subtle difference, but it's a difference that makes all of the world a difference to the impact of the product. It's the difference between just putting things out there, measuring the results, and then talking about what's working, which unfortunately, there are many CEOs in particular who quite like that approach. That's very different to saying, well, this is the impact we want to have. We want people to be using at least 10 of our APIs every month, and they need to be making 1,000 requests. That's what big time is. And then tracking that as a metric and doing everything you can to drive that particular metric. So the big picture here is, it's this second line of what the most successful teams do that I'm going to talk a little bit about how to do today. Before we get there, I would just love to understand where we are in the scheme of things here, who has a North Star metric today. Fascinating. Results are coming in. Thank you for being so hot on the trigger, everyone. This is really great participation. Going to give it a few more seconds to run. Okay, I'm going to stop it. Share results. All right, you should see the results. So we've got most of us don't have 50% don't have a North Star metric. Okay. And then very few of us are happy with the North Star metric. Okay, that's unfortunate because having a North Star metric really helps build alignments and helps drive the teams. So I can talk a lot about how we do that today. Okay. So what I tend to see and what I found myself and then found with other founders I've come across, worked with, friends and so on over the years is these repeating problems. Things like we had a big vision, but we weren't sure how to define the next steps. And this is often a founder who's like got product market fit in a company startup. We have product market fit. Then we're trying to take that next big leap. There's all of this vision, but which of the 100 different directions do we go in? We could sometimes go in a different one every week, which of course means we don't get anywhere. We need to nail the customer value proposition to drive up conversions. So the other side of this is the product is just not converting. There's somewhere in the funnel, whether it's in the capture of customers or the retention and activation, something isn't working. We need to drive up that value, and we're just not building the features that are driving value up. This very common one being reactive, saying yes too often, distracting us from where we really wanted to be. Lots and lots of leaders I hear saying the same thing. This is a tough one, right? Because it's also always tempting to follow the money with customers. But if you're just continuously changing directions, you end up turning in circles. Our leadership team was struggling to communicate our vision to the team. All decision-making was with the CPO. I had to sort of talk this guy off the precipice with his 20, 30-minute meetings a day in this case. The product teams were not taking decisions. And this is a thorny problem that you can get to, even up to hundreds of people. You get decision-making concentrated in a couple of people, and it really slows things down. It makes the teams unpleasant places to work, and it really costs big when it comes to growth. So interestingly, I see these as the problems that are solved by well set up product metrics. Now, one of the things I raise this here, right, is because I'm imagining that in some of your jobs, you may have to convince CEOs or heads of sale why it's worth taking the time to set up metrics. I've certainly seen a lot. There's a certain type of CEO who is often very sales driven, who doesn't really want to take the time to set things up and measure things and doesn't quite know why it's worth it. Well, these are all problems that leaders can relate to, right? Turning around in circles, not delivering enough value, not being able to turn your vision into action. These are all things that getting metrics done right, these are all problems that will solve. So you can sort of summarize it like this. I think that the big problem that we're here to solve, and certainly between the chief product officer, chief technology officer, and founders, right, is getting alignment in the team. Particularly as we start to scale and add multiple squads, each of those squads need to be really aligned at the same direction of travel. Otherwise, it's somewhat pointless, and it can even be destructive to value to add more people into the team. I think many of us have worked in companies or had phases of companies where it just feels like for every new engineer you add, you're getting less done because you're just creating overhead and people just are not aligned in the right direction. So I see this lack of alignment being a key driver of low customer value creation, just not quite nailing the features and the use cases. It's slow decision-making at a company level. And ultimately, it's founders and leaders being stuck in the weeds. If you're in your weekly meetings, should be taking 30 minutes in the senior leadership team, and they're taking 90 minutes, and you're debating features and what color things should be, right? That's a mess. And I think many of us have sadly been there, but these are all symptoms of this lack of alignment that we can help to fix. So how do we do that? How can we create this beautifully aligned strategy where all of our teams are empowered to achieve their very best? To me, it all starts with a North Star metric. And I'm quite obsessive about it because I saw the magical power of the North Star to turn around my own startup when we were having all of those problems. So before we get going on this, what I would like to know is, out of interest, how do you rate these North Stars? So I've put 3 North Stars up. Just tell me, just your gut feel, which of these are good, which of these are not good. Great. I'll let that run a little bit longer. Okay, and share the results. I know some of you didn't get to answer, but just want to keep things moving. Okay, MAUs, week. Who wants to share why they think MAUs, monthly actives, might be a weak metric? You can shout out, come off mute, or you can type it in the chat. Weak North Star metric. Nothing wrong with it as a supporting metric.
By itself, it doesn't really move you anywhere towards a goal, does it? It's just people are active, but they're not necessarily using it for anything very important because they're not. It doesn't reveal how valuable it is.
Yeah, yeah. What are they actually doing? Yeah, we got vanity metric. Yeah, doesn't say value delivered, detail and degree of engagement. Yeah, cool. We're spot on with this. ARR. Who wants to make an argument here for ARR being a strong North Star metric? Few people put great. What's good about ARR as a North Star metric?
Shows you're doing something right, I think, at least.
Doing something right? Yeah.
The customers are paying if it's annual recurring revenue, so you're delivering some value.
Yeah. You, of course, don't. We all call it ARR, but we often don't really know if it's ARR.
It doesn't tell you how much you're getting from individuals or how many customers you've got.
Yeah.
So, it's not saying if you've just got one guy who's doing really, really well for you, or you've got a million guys who are doing mediocre.
Cool. All right. I'm going to give the answers to this later, by the way. I have strong views on all of this. And retained users. Who wants to make an argument for retained users being a weak metric? Weak North Star metric. Retained is way worse than engaged. Okay.
Again, I think it depends what field you're working in. I spent a lot of time in a field where customer acquisition was incredibly expensive and customer retention was about 50% more than acquisition. So actually, it was really, really important to keep them, regardless of how much activity they took place in. So.
Cool. Thanks for everyone's thoughts. I won't leave you all hanging. I'm going to dive into my views on all of these as a North Star metric. There's nothing wrong with any of those metrics in terms of telling you useful things. Question is that the one metric you want to align behind? So what the hell is a North Star metric anyway? So there's often a lot of confusion on this one. We've got these business goals we're trying to achieve, such as ARR, NRR, growth, and so on. And that's the kind of business domain. And that's cool. That's kind of the raison d'etre of most companies, is to achieve those business outcomes. Certainly what the board and the investors care about. Your North Star metric directs you towards those goals. So if you think of it literally as a North Star, the North Star isn't necessarily where you're going to, it directs you to your ultimate goal. And it gets you there in the way that you want to get there. Because there's lots of different ways to achieve ARR. There's lots of different ways to achieve those business goals. The North Star is part of your strategy. So it's a decision of how are we going to get there? Are we going to get there by focusing on retention of users? Are we going to get there focusing on something else? And if chosen well, the North Star really shapes your product. I'm going to show you some examples of that. 3 litmus tests that I have for, is something a good North Star metric? The biggest one is it simply asks the question, how would users behave if they really loved our product? That's just the discussion to start to have with the team. Now, if people really loved our product, when we really nail it, or if you are nailing it right now, how do they behave? And we got to make sure it's a behavior. So what are they going to do that we can track through our analytics? Secondly, it needs to focus us all on the next big milestone. So typically an area where teams go a bit wrong on this is we think of North Star metric as being like our company vision or something, which you don't really want to be changing your vision very often. If you've got to change it, okay, but if you change your vision every 6 months, the team are going to wonder what's going on. It's fine to change your North Star metric. It just takes you to the next major milestone. And the real reality in startups is the things that get you to product market fit are not the things that get you from product market fit to expansion, and they're not the things that get you to scale up. And this is an underlying problem I see across the board in different startups that I work with, where, you know, it's very tempting to hire people who are going to be great in 2 years' time. Oh, let's hire this person because she's got loads of capacity. She knows how to manage teams. But right now, we don't need anyone to manage teams. We need someone to do the work. And it's the same problem we often fall into with North Star metrics. We pick the North Star metric that we want to have in the future, but that doesn't help us get to that point. So it's fine to be changing North Star metrics. Finally, it needs to be both memorable and inspiring to the team. And this one's really important because we're going to talk about it at least once a week and probably once a day in most teams. So it's got to be something that is, you know, you can remember. It's not so much of a mouthful or so weird that people can't remember what it is. But if it's a little bit unique and it really speaks to the strategy and the character of the company, that's a very good thing. So I'm going to show you a bunch of examples now. We're going to get very pragmatic. But it's these three things to keep in mind for a North Star metric. How would users behave if they loved your product? Is it focusing us on the next big milestone we're going to? And is it memorable and inspiring to the team? So starting with myself, the North Star metric we set in 2018, which really helped us turn things around in quite a big way, was at the activation layer. So this is a B2B an enterprise, so non-SaaS B2B product, very long sales cycles. We were having problems activating customers. We were having problems going from demos that were going quite well to just getting those customers signed up to start using this very big, expensive product that we'd built. And what we did is we actually set the company North Star as being demo to first meeting conversion. Very weird North Star metric to set, right? And this transformed things. So before we set this, we were having all these problems where the teams building these different components were not communicating with each other. It was all very messy. We had these instances where the products were just not fit for purpose and everyone was arguing back and forth. When I showed this North Star metric to the product manager responsible for this software here on the screen, I said, okay, decision made. We're going to focus on demo to first meeting conversion. He was like, okay, cool. You know what? I think I need to go talk to some customers. It's like, yes, you do need to go talk to some customers. That's wonderful. And he said, okay, and I think we need to measure something else. Like maybe we should ask the customers for an NPS when they see the product. It was like, yes, fantastic. And it's really transformed us from being a bunch of people kind of arguing with each other and having these very emotive discussions about the reason we're not selling is because the shade of blue isn't the right shade of blue, like literally those kind of conversations, to one in which the teams were suddenly empowered to go out and get things done. And they were empowered because they had one problem to solve, demo to first meeting conversion. So let's just solve that problem. If you solve that problem, we're all good. So this was a super powerful catalyst for us. One of the companies I worked with, so Gaia GPS, they were an app company that scaled up to about 100, 150 people and then were acquired in this in a big private equity roll-up. And I worked with them as they were just transitioning from the point of which they actually had no product managers. And then the engineers came to the CEO and were like, Andrew, we need some product managers. It's getting out of control. So they've been this very proud bottom-up organization. So I worked with them to put in place the sort of product layer there. They needed revenue, right? They were being bought by private equity. So they needed revenue as a goal. But their North Star metric they set as retained users. And this did a really nice job of setting the whole tone within the company post-acquisition, because it meant that instead of it being, yeah, it's just revenue at the sake of everything, and we just push all of the development teams onto the latest revenue-generating feature we can think of, they said, no, we know that if our users are retained, if they're coming back and using us every single month, they're going to convert. They're going to buy upgrades. They're going to buy packages. So let's focus on building that retained user base. Let's make sure we're acquiring users that will retain. Let's make sure we're building features to keep them retained. And this worked extremely well for them. One of the D2C companies I worked with set this North Star metric of digitally returning customers. So they're selling a physical product, but they wanted people to come back and engage with them digitally. So we set this very specific one of saying we want a customer who is a digital customer and returns to us. So some quite specific definitions here. What it means is when they onboard people into the company, they show people this North Star. And of course, their new starters say, well, what does digital returning mean? And they're able to explain that to them, which explains a huge amount of their strategy in one metric. Final example, just to show that transactions can be a great North Star, is transactions, which works very well for many fintechs. So the message here really is that don't focus. A lot of people get, oh, but Facebook's North Star is MAUs and Airbnb's is this. Kind of forget that. That's not important. What your friend's North Star is not important. What's important is really thinking through, what kind of a company are we building? What are our goals? Where are we trying to get to? And how would our users behave if they loved our product? If that behavior is doing loads of transactions, then cool, transactions is a good North Star. But if what you're really looking for is people to consistently come back week after week, month after month, retention is going to be better, and so on. So it takes, there's a process here to getting a great North Star. Okay, going to ask for your inputs again. I'm going to skip past this. I don't know what poll I had there. All right, so I want to take you through some examples really quickly. So I showed you 4 North Stars here, demo to first meeting conversion and so on. And I just want to really exemplify this point that it's all about how would users behave if they love the product? Does it focus on the next big milestone? Is it memorable and inspiring to the whole team? And this is really, really good sanity checks to do as you go away with your team, you work on North Star metrics. Just keep asking yourselves these questions, because if you're finding a North Star that ticks these boxes, it's likely much, much, much more likely to succeed than one that doesn't tick one of those boxes. One of the areas that people get quite confused is the level of detail. And with a North Star metric, detail is actually good. We're not trying to find something generic. We're not necessarily trying to get monthly active users because it's a well-known metric. It's okay to have something that is a bit specific to us. So digitally returning customers is a great example of that. Digital, what does that mean? So this was a super important discussion to talk about what do we actually mean by digital customer? They buy a physical product. Is it someone just scans a QR code, or do they have to log into our app? So you start to get that definition baked in. Returning, is returning just coming to the website for a second and being a session, or does returning mean actually going through some kind of a value loop on the website? And customer. What is a customer? Is it a user? Is it a customer? Is it someone who spends a certain amount of money? If I spend a certain amount of money in January and I come back in November, am I still a customer? And really breaking down into detail is incredibly important because it reveals a lot about the strategy of the company. This is particularly important as startups go from 25, 50 people upwards, because at that 25, 35 threshold, the founders or founding team can still have all of this stuff in their heads and it works okay. They work 80, 90 hours a week. They're up all night answering people's messages. That's fine. Once you go beyond 35-ish people, you can't have this stuff in your head because there's just too many different teams. There's too many different parallel operations. So founding teams need to start taking all of this implicit strategy, the implicit idea of where we're going, and writing it down. And just last week, I was talking to a friend who's chief product officer who was saying, do you guys have a product strategy? He was like, yes, it's in the CEO's head, and that's okay when he's around, and it's not okay when he's not around. It really slows down teams. So detail is good. Get it written down. All right. Bit of fun, but quite interesting. So a few months ago, I asked ChatGPT what made a good North Star, which of course is a great example of what the internet thinks makes a good North Star, or thought 2 years ago. It told me a bunch of stuff there, and I'm going to go through and comment on that because I think every single one of its recommendations is a terrible North Star. I even put used by startups, a really terrible North Star. So that worries me a bit because I think there's quite a lot of startups out there, if not using these, that they're reading advice that these are the right type of North Star metrics to use, and they're really not. So let's go through each of these. So MRR, right? So imagine you're a subscription-based business and you're going for MRR as your North Star metric, the top of the tree of metrics. So is this how users behave if they love the product? I don't think it is, for a number of reasons. Does it focus the organization on the next big milestone? No, because it's not particularly inspiring just going from like 200 MRR to 500 MRR to 1 million MRR. And you know, the message I always give to CEOs on this, yes, that may be exciting to you, CEO, but you need to go talk to your developers if you think that's exciting to the vast majority of developers, because that's not why what we're in this for. It's nice to create MRR as an outcome, but we're here to build some product that has some impact and then delivers the MRR. The biggest problem with this, though, is that it's not a behavioral metric. MRR isn't a behavior that someone does. And that leads to what I've called the Groupon effect. So you remember Groupon, the kind of crazy discount deal site? So this is their valuation after they IPO'd. The problem that Groupon had was they focused everything on just driving up monthly transactions. So it wasn't even really MRR, but everyone just calls monthly revenue MRR, basically. So they focused on driving up revenue, but there was no retention. Because MRR, if you have 100 million MRR, you've got like 1 million MRR, let's say, you have no idea of those £1 million that you're bringing across transacting each month. How many of those are retained versus how many of them are new? And if you're just acquiring new MRR every single month, that's going to become a massive problem. That's going to become incredibly expensive to fund. So MRR, you know, really with a North Star metric, they work. You get the outcome you set. And if you decide MRR as the overall goal, you're going to get loads of MRR, and it will be coming from all kinds of different places. And because you're focusing on new revenue acquisition versus revenue retention, that revenue is not likely to retain well. That's my big guide on MRR. Doesn't mean it's not incredibly important. And it, obviously, in any SaaS business, we're there to create MRR. That's what SaaS is all about. But focusing exclusively at the top of the pyramid on MRR doesn't actually get you MRR. We need to go down one level and work out what are the behaviors of our users that are going to create that MRR. It's very similar with MAUs. What I find a lot with MAUs, though, is because Facebook have MAUs as a North Star, lots of founders, CEOs are like, oh, let's have the same as Facebook. Work for them isn't going to work for us. What kind of stuns me, actually, is when you start to break down the sort of MAUs iceberg, so many CEOs are not really aware of this one, actually, that, you know, you may have 10,000 MAUs, wonderful, but let's look at them in some more interesting categories, right? Where you've got the top category, which is your new or pre-activated. So this is like users who just came in the last 30, 60, 90 days, however you define it. And they haven't activated. They haven't been through the activation threshold of the product. You've then got your engaged users, however you define that, you know, retained, engaged, whatever. And then you've got the dormant ones who are going inactive. And there's many companies that have scaled to hundreds of people and, you know, tens of millions of revenue who aren't breaking this down and looking at this, which leads to massive problems because you're kind of saying that the value of all 10,000 MAUs is equal. But what's pretty clear here, right, is it's these green guys, these green ones are the valuable ones. The blue ones, if they're not activating and being retained, that is very poor marketing spend, and that's going to drive our CAC all the way up. So if we want to get these strong metrics, we want to get MRR, we want to get high lifetime value, we want to lower our CAC, we need to focus on the behaviors that create that, which is having users come in again and again, get value from our product, spend money within the product, tell their friends about the product, you know, measurable behaviors. The final problem I see with MAUs, right, is that it's someone who used the product once in the last 30 days. For some products, that's kind of okay if you use it once, but it's not really great for most products using us once in a month. It tells us very, very little, right? And it's obvious that Facebook have done this when they went public to sort of smooth their results. Because if I might use Facebook, I don't use Facebook, but I might use Facebook 20 times in a month, 1 month, one time the next month. And that is just 1 MAU 1 month, 1 MAU the next month, right? So if that is the main metric you're steering the ship by, you're completely missing the point that I was using you 20 times more last month than this month. So it's a great reporting metric if you're a public company and you want to smooth changes, but it's a very weak metric to grow a startup by. You can join in my debate on LinkedIn should this take your fancy. The other two that ChatGPT came up with are just a bit crazy. CAC, I mean, I don't know, even in these like private equity companies I work with, where obviously cost control is a major thing, no one promotes the idea of having CAC. So it's definitely the CFO is in charge. NPS is an interesting one, right? I love NPS because it's so brutal in that you get heavily punished for the detractors on NPS. And you find out all kinds of interesting things about your product by reading and talking to the people who give bad NPS. I think NPS is a great second order metric, either a proxy metric or a balance metric, but it's not a North Star for several reasons. Firstly, it's very easily gameable. That really your North Star metric, it shouldn't be easily gameable. Like when it increments, you have to know that value delivery has been incremented to the customer. And, you know, NPS, you may have 20% of your users who regularly do NPS, fine. What about the other 80%? Do we have any evidence we're delivering value to them? The big problem, though, is the North Star metric needs to continuously increment. And NPS, what if you get it to 100? Which is unlikely, right? But what if we get it to 90 and it just stays at 90? Does that mean that all these features are not adding value? Well, no, of course not. So I don't go for NPS as a North Star metric. So because everyone always asks for it, I put in what big tech does, but I just think there's a lot of cautions here. So Spotify's North Star metric is time spent listening. And by the way, I put these in and I validated them with people who actually work at the companies, which is why I've picked these for in the last year. It might have changed, but at the time of validation. So Spotify's North Star metric is, or has been in the past, time spent listening. That's pretty cool. When you think about the Spotify app, you can then look at every feature they have in it. It does compel you to listen, right? They are trying to keep you within the app. They're putting in podcasts and they're putting in automatic playlists. So time listening is definitely a big part of the strategy of Spotify. Now, they also want retained users and they also want MRR, right? But they've chosen time spent listening as being the one metric that they go for because they're confident that's going to create these second and third order impacts. It's a really smart thinking. Airbnb, I love this one actually. Airbnb number of nights booked. So as a marketplace where you've got buyer and seller transacting, it can make a lot of sense to have your North Star metric as being the unit of transaction because it's where the buyer and the seller join. So if nights are being booked in Airbnb, that's overall a good sign. There are clearly some weaknesses. It's not telling us anything about retention. It's not telling us about quality. And it's a very laggy indicator. So if you make changes in the product, it's probably going to take a while for that to scale up. Zoom, number of weekly hosted meetings. This is, again, a nice one. And HubSpot, pretty much the same. Weekly active teams. Slack has weekly active teams as well. The nice thing with teams is and active, these both, it lends itself to a definition of what is active and what is a team. In Slack's case, the team part is very important because they identified that you need a minimum of like 3 or 4 people to kickstart the network effect. So this really exemplifies my point that the North Star metric, none of these are MAUs, none of these are your kind of bog standard mixed panel out of the package metrics, because these tell you something about the company's strategy, whereas MAUs, DAOs, well, it doesn't tell you anything about the strategy of the company. And this is what we want, particularly as we're scaling, you know, beyond 25, 50 people, adding parallel teams. We're trying to build empowerment in our teams. The biggest caution I give on this, where a lot of people get this wrong, right, is, you know, we're almost everyone's less than 250 people in the company today. I think most of us have probably got product market fit. This is Spotify's growth timeline, right? What I'm actually interested in is what happened whilst they were scaling, because that's the part of startups that I'm the most interested in. You know, if you were focused on pre-product market fit, you'd want to know what were they doing down to the left of the green arrow. And if you were focused on growth, you'd want to know what was going on the right. And this happens time and time again, where X company writes a blog post about the stuff they're doing, everybody jumps on it and does the same thing, even if they're talking about what they did when they had 10,000 people and you've got 100 people. So we've got to be really careful of making sure what we do is stage dependent, and we've got to get really to the bottom of why we're doing things and not end up cargo culting and copying what other companies do. Again, tends to be quite tempting for leaders who are very, very busy and just want to move quickly to try and, you know, pick something off the shelf and plug it in. But I really advise against it. So here are some of the mistakes that I see happening the most when it comes to North Stars. And I'm going to ask for a little honesty quiz afterwards to say which ones you're making. So the big one is a commercial goal, not a behavioral one. You know, the North Star metric is ARR. Let's get going and set ARR. You lose the opportunity to build a product, to start to influence the users' behaviors, you risk the Groupon effect, where you have lots of MRR, but you don't actually have user love. We're trying to get users to love us. Generic, not specific, copying big tech, MAUs for the sake of MAUs. Team don't adopt the North Star. This is one of the big ones where we do all the work, we've got one, and then no one uses it. Often because it's generic and it's a commercial metric that's kind of meaningless to most of the work that we're all doing. Too visionary, too far out. This is a tough one. I've fallen for this one myself when I've been the founder. It's like, oh, this is where we need to be in 5 years, guys. Let's set the metric. It needs to be out here. If that isn't reflective of the work that needs doing, it's not a good metric. And then finally, having a lack of second order or proxy metrics. So often the temptation is we got a good North Star. Let's all just get going with the work. That works when you're one product team or, just a front end, back end team sometimes. But as soon as you've got parallel squads and growth teams, you need to have a clear proxy metric lined up with each of those squads. So now honesty time. Who's making these mistakes? Which of these mistakes are you making? Multiple choices allowed. Interesting. I love seeing these come in real time. Okay, I'm going to end the poll. This is what we got. So lacking second order, commercial not behavioral, and team aren't bought in. Okay, yeah, that's often what I see. Good that we're not copying big tech. That's fantastic. Okay, so hopefully there's some empowerment here to go out and challenge some of your leadership and get those metrics changed to behavioral rather than commercial. I'll show you a canvas I use to do that. And I'll show you how to get the team bought in as well. Cool. So I worked with an unusually very early stage startup for me. The CEO is a friend called Scooch, a pet insurance product last year to help set their North Star metric. And this is how we do it. It's how I do it with everybody. It just there's a nice photo, so it illustrates it well. And this is how you get the team bought in. Step one is get the right people in the room. Now, I used to try and tell people who were the right people and then realize that's ridiculous. You know who the right people are. It's your team. Try and get as many people as you can, really. Like, you can actually do this with quite a big group of people. I've done it with like 50 people in the room. It's just a case of organizing the session well, having a big room, using breakouts. We want to make sure everyone's voice is heard. It's not a democracy. We're not just going to vote on the North Star metric we like the most, but we do want to hear different people's opinions. Most importantly, though, we want to share the same context. If you come up with a somewhat weird North Star metric or something that's a bit surprising, something that isn't what big tech use, to get your team bought in, the more of those people, particularly the engineering managers, the product managers, and the tech leads and so on, the more of them who are in the room when this happens, the better they're going to be able to advocate for that North Star metric when they start using it. So this is key, and this is it's a lot of fun. I certainly love doing these types of workshops. You've got to be crystal clear on your business goals. And really, before you get your engineering managers in the room, the CEO, CTO, the leadership team need to be really clear on what are we actually trying to achieve. And it always amazes me the number of CEOs that I do this with, the founders, who aren't super clear on where they need to be in 1 year or 3 years. It's like, well, we're going to fundraise, but we're also going to do this and we're going to do that. You need a crystal clear, this is where we're going. We're going to expand into these geographies, or we need to add another 5 million ARR before we do our next thing. We need to have that clear goal. Otherwise, you can't have a North Star. If you don't know where you're going, how can you choose the direction you're going in? You then run a brainstorm. You just say, okay, how would users behave if they loved our product? Let's solicit the information. And this is where it's great. This is where we want sales and customer success and designers and anyone who's been talking to customers and product managers and our engineers in the room, because these are the people who have those ideas. How would users behave if they loved the product? You then filter through all of those answers, cluster them together, and we're trying to find the 3 litmus tests, right? Memorable, personal, and something that is specific to our company and our strategy. Once you've got your North Star, you're not done yet. In the same process, so literally over this course of the same day or days, you come straight back to your team and you say, so what could you do to drive the North Star? Now we've identified that it's weekly active teams. What can we stop and start doing to drive the North Star? And the best teams I do this with, straight away, people put their hand up and they're like, oh, well, now we know it's that's our North Star. I think we should stop all of this stuff that we're doing here because that's not driving anything. And let's launch some initiatives doing this because that is going to drive it. And this is a sign of a North Star that's been set well. You immediately get the empowerment. You immediately get the team stepping up and putting in their ideas. The nice thing is, as opposed to most idea suggestion boxes that companies have, where it's like just slip it in and maybe something gets done with it, we can validate whether it's a good idea or not because it's driving the North Star metric. So we're creating a closed loop. If you remember back to what I said at the beginning, the best teams don't just do some stuff and measure it. They decide what they need to do. This is the what we need to do. So suddenly it's really valid asking all the team for their ideas because you never know where the best idea is going to come from. People have a unique way of looking at things depending on the information they've got in their background, and it's all validatable. The next thing, which I'm going to touch on really briefly today, is getting your second order proxy growth metrics in place. And I'm going to show a little bit about how I do that. Then as the founder, as the senior leader, talk about the North Star incessantly. And it's our jobs as the senior leaders to make this real. So at least once a week in the all hands, I talk about the North Star, the progress on it, break it down, what's contributing to it, why do we think it's going up, why is it going down, what experiments are driving it. And then you also want to make sure that's happening in individual team meetings. Of course, most of your teams here, most teams are not going to be directly driving the North Star. They're going to be working through a proxy metric. But we need this keen idea of we're releasing these features because it's going to drive this user behavior, which we believe is going to drive the North Star. And I've even in the company I've just been working with where we're just sort of getting a lot of process going. We just wrote in the Jira ticket, in each Jira ticket, we wrote the link between this is a ticket to lead to this feature, which we expect to lead to this behavior, which we expect to drive the North Star metric. So every single one of our team know the hypothesis behind the work that's being done. That was really impactful. So I want to talk a little bit about how this fits into product strategy. Who's got a product strategy today? Okay. Interesting. So most of us we've had a go at it. That's good. For the 5 no's, that's concerning. We need to know how we're going to achieve our goals. To me, strategy is the how, right? How are we going to delight our customers? How are we going to build moats? How are we going to build advantage through the technology we're building? Yes, but it's yeah. So this is normally the case. Yes, but not well communicated, used, and understood. So I hope to help with that a little bit today by showing some of the ways in which I help this strategy be better communicated and understood. So I put together this canvas, which you can grab out of the slides of this. I'll send to Barry to send around. The point is not the canvas. The point is the things that are on it. So what I find super useful is just to break down on the same page. And you can having this in Miro is wonderful. From the vision, which is the difference we want to make in the world. The company goals. So what is the high level mission, the OKRs we're trying to get to in 12-ish months? The North Star metric, which everything pivots around, our value propositions, and then our key balance metrics. Balance metrics are like dashboard lights in a car. You're trying to go from A to B, and it's quite important if the engine overheats and goes on fire, but you're not driving from A to B so that the engine stays at a certain temperature, right? So a balance metric is a KPI, a dashboard metric, a check. It's not the why, it's just an important thing to look at so that you don't overheat the engine. And then we've got our engagement drivers and our growth drivers. So engagement, typically more product, growth, typically more marketing, but often you see those mixing together. And I find that just getting this all down, you can do this in an hour. Just write down what is our best guess at what each of these things are. Starting to get this onto a canvas. At the worst case, it shows you where there are massive gaps. The best case, and what normally happens is there's a lot more information there than you think. It just means getting a few people in the room at the same time. What this allows you to do is it creates far more alignment. It creates a lot more certainty, particularly within the product and the growth teams, about why are we building this feature? Well, we're building it because we believe it's going to drive engagement in this way, which in turn is there to satisfy the value proposition, the promise we make to our customer. And we're doing that because we think it's going to increment our North Star metric, which is ultimately going to deliver on our company goal, revenue or growth or expansion. So that's really briefly on that one. What I get particularly excited about with all of this is org design. You know, how do you take all of these metrics and put it into really well-structured teams that empower individual people and groups of people to achieve amazing things? So I just want to see where we are on that today, so I know how deep to go. One of my final questions of the day. Where are you guys today when it comes to org? Oh, cool. We're trending well. Oh, no. I didn't think. That's weird. So wow, this has been an exciting one. It went all over the place whilst we were filling this out. Because it's an equal split. That's why. Interesting. Okay, here you go. Pretty much everyone, right? So we got some single dev teams, cool. And then squads, outcome driven, some not, some feature factories. That's quite a lot of feature factories. That's unfortunate for you guys if you want to try and transition out of being a feature factory. Maybe hopefully some of the arguments I put forward here might help. Okay, so let's take a look at this then. So eye chart time, but this is the sort of template that I tend to use in an ideal world. More B2B focused, but can also work for B2C. The idea is, right, we've got our company North Star metric. Let's say it's weekly active teams, for example. What we do then is we make sure each team has a mission and a single metric that determines their focus. And you notice each team here, this isn't, the iOS team and the backend team. These teams are oriented based on the mission. So it's my interpretation of what a squad means. The team has the people needed to achieve its mission. So if strategy one is to delight our customers by delivering personalized offers to them, strategy one team has all the people needed to do that, from the product managers to the copywriters, potentially to the marketing people through to the engineers. So this is what I call squads. I'm guessing for the 12 people who said they do squads, you're probably doing something similar to this. We then, of course, have a platform team. It's rare you get away without having a platform team. I mean, the idea, right, is you have multiple verticals, all, tightly aligned, loosely coupled, chasing after their own goals. Every time I do this, you end up needing some kind of a platform team, if only for things like data science and DevOps. The nice thing here is that you take things like growth and onboarding, the top of the funnel, because product is normally focusing on the engagement part of the funnel. You take growth and onboarding and you align them in exactly the same structure, which means we get away with these artificial distinctions between the developers go do this and the growth people do this, because really we're all driving the North Star. And this is what the high growth tech companies do, like the guys like Rain, who I've worked with. The high growth comes from every single team chasing the same metric. If it's weekly active teams that we're going for our North Star, all of our product strategy teams are working on weekly active teams, and our growth team is acquiring customers who are going to lead to weekly active teams. So misalignment is when sales and marketing are bringing in one type of customer and the product team has built a product for a different customer, right? That's the B2B nightmare that many of us have probably been in. Sales are convinced that we need to build features that we don't have yet, and product convinced that we have the features and the sales aren't doing their job. You avoid all of that by orging your teams like this behind a North Star. The proxy metrics come in like this, right? Because you've got the people in the teams, You then make sure each team has its own metric. And this is what I did at CloudMate actually in here. Oh, maybe it's not. So for example, growth is the number of demo meetings booked. Onboarding are working on the number of activated customers. There's 2 teams because they're split in 2 regions here. Strategy team is working on driving NPS of a demo. One is working on getting correct predictions in the case of a personalization system. The other strategy team is working on converting MQL to a waitlist for a new product that's being launched. And this is literally the only thing that these teams, this is the only thing that these teams are working on. So this is the focus. And we say no to a lot of things. The nice thing is we say no up front. So we agree each quarter or whatever the planning cycle is, we agree that this is going to be the focus to drive the North Star, and then we focus on it. Okay, I'm nearly out of time, so I do want to open up to some questions. I'm going to touch really briefly on OKRs. Essentially, the big problem I see when people try and link OKRs with North Star metrics is just aligning things wrong. You've got a 12 to 24 month goals horizon, sales growth, engagement, back office, for example. You've got your key results. Often it's quite easy. Most companies have these phrased quite well at 12 months. What we need to do is in a senior leadership team, we need to break down our 90-day goals, right? And there needs to be no more than 3 to 5 key results per member of the senior leadership team. So if it's a 5-person senior leadership team, we should have never more than 25, ideally 15 key results that are reported on weekly. And at the senior leadership team level, it's flat. So we don't come in as the CTO and report on the CTO goals and the chief product officer goals. We think of our senior leadership team in the same way we think of squads. So there's a distinct mission within the team, and there are, cross-functional goals. So for example, sales growth, the ultimate key results of sales growth is sales metrics. But in order to get that done, there are going to be product features that need to be built in order to achieve that, which need to be reported on a monthly basis. The North Star sits in between our annual goals and our 90-day goals. So the North Star helps direct and prioritize. So when we're like, oh my God, we got all this stuff we got to achieve at the end of the year, where do we start? The answer is what is going to increment the North Star the most? Okay, that was super quick. There's so much more content to go to on OKRs. I spend a lot of time working with teams on them. Hard to do it justice. Big guide on North Star metrics, which encapsulates a lot of this stuff you can grab off LinkedIn. It's quite useful. It really just sums up a lot of the things I've talked about, goes into a little bit more on proxy metrics as well. I'm going to leave it there because I'm almost out of time. I want to let you get going. I can hang around for 5 minutes or so and take some questions, but thank you very much for your time today and for your participation. I hope this has been helpful, and happy to hear if anyone's got any questions. Just drop them. You can talk or drop it into the thing. Oh, I had one more. I wanted, before you go, just to get some feedback from you. So if you mind just dropping in that poll, would be wonderful. Helps me know how useful things are. I haven't done this talk for CTOs before, so this is quite interesting to me. So please shout if you've got any questions.
Thank you. I have seen some companies that try to force customers to get into their application every day, to force driving engagement, instead of just because of this, they try to measure mostly active users and all that. Do you think that this is good or not? Because I think that when the product is good enough, you don't have to force people to get inside. They should really like to go inside.
Yeah, well, almost definitely a bad idea. It's that Groupon problem, right? It's people should. I always come back to, we want to create value, and we want to have a value exchange. So yeah, we can do push notifications and we can do loads of stuff to draw attention to it. But each time I come in, I should only be counted as an active user if there's a value exchange, if there's some meaningful value given to me. Which is, there were some comments on MAUs at the beginning, right, about them, why they're not a good idea. So I would never count a monthly active as being any session, right, or any touch whatsoever on the property. I always count MAUs as being the active is a bundle of events from Mixpanel or Amplitude or whatever. It's a bundle of events that constitute value delivery. So we sit down and we say, well, we think when a user does these things, it means they've got value. So we'll count that as an active.
Hi, Nick.
Hello.
That was very good. On your, you mentioned in some of the earlier slides, the focus as a sort of above the North Star. And you had a couple that started off sounding very pirate metric-y. I think you had activation and revenue. Then you had growth, yeah. I think. Do you have a sort of finite list of what those focuses should be based on the work that you've done?
Yeah, it's something that I often end up doing with teams to help focus them. So there's two different models I use. One is literally just pirate metrics. Like, are we talking about activation here? Like, what is, sometimes teams can't get focused on the priority. So it's like, look, where is the problem today? Like, are we leaking users out of the funnel at the bottom? Are we failing to activate? So yeah, and then are we failing to acquire? Normally, though, your North Star metric needs to be quite low in the funnel. So I've never encouraged anybody to set one that's above the activation point. And even setting it activation is a little risky. But if you wanted to just go hell for leather, launching over 6 months, it could make sense. Facebook famously did that with 10 users, 10 friend connections in 7 days. The other slightly more simple model that I kind of stole from the VP product of Netflix, Gibson Biddle, who's written loads of good stuff on all this, is growth, engagement, monetization. So what are the growth metrics we're trying to see? What are the engagement metrics? What are the monetization? And in our current discussion, are we talking about growth, engagement, or monetization? And I often pull CEOs in particular back to that discussion of which level are we talking about here?
Nice.
Nick, it's interesting. You've worked obviously on both sides of the coin. So, well, 3 sides: growing companies, startups, whatever you want to call them, expanding the startups and scaling them, and on the investor side of stuff. Would you, at an expanding company that's, say, going, I don't know, from seed to Series A or Series A to Series B, put any weight of that into the North Star metric? Or how would you, the way that I would tend to raise investment is to target an investment company of some kind, see what they're looking for, and gear all documentation around what fits their marketplace. But how do you, how much of that would you do in terms of actual sort of product development, market development, product market fit type stuff?
Oh, it's super important, right? I mean, so what I normally do when I do this work with companies, the first thing I do is normally just with the CEO, just one-on-one, talk about where do we need to get to in the next 18 to 24 months. And if a fundraise is one of those, if it's we need to raise our Series B, the next question is, so what are the key results for raising a Series B? Like, how are you going to know you're ready to raise a Series B? And the good CEOs are networking with the investors, and they have their finger on the pulse of what we need right now is ABC. And what we're seeing in the market now, of course, is you kind of need a path to profitability to raise money. In 95% of cases, you're not going to raise unless you can show a clear path to profitability in the next 12 to 24 months. So therefore, that's a hard requirement. And many companies now are bifurcating where it's like, either we're going to get to break even or we're going to raise the round. And that's a case where we do really have 2 priorities and we got to deal with that. But in that case, Tom, what I do is say, okay, we know we need to show a path to profitability. So that's got to be built into the product strategy. This is not acquire users at all cost. This is, we need to grow, we need to engage, and we need to monetize those users. So it's super important.
That's kind of quite a complex, compounded metric. Yeah, how do you view it in terms of where would the sort of North Star of that live, if you like?
Yeah,
what
I mean,
part of that would go into the North Star?
the thing is here, right? I find that if you have that conversation up front and you write down those goals quite clearly, and then you talk about the North Star, then you actually focus on the North Star, which is probably the same North Star metric, right? It's almost always North Star metrics are some kind of a user engagement metrics. It's about how do users love our product, right? So, so whether it's weekly active teams or whether it's, minutes spent, that's one element. The problem that comes is you often find it hard to get to the North Star metric because when you're supposed to be talking about North Star metric, you're talking about company goals.
Yeah.
So do you see what I mean? It's like separating the two out, help you get there far, and with a lot more clarity.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you.
Jump in if anyone's got, or raise hands, or jump in either. Checking. If not, I've actually just about to start a workshop. I might jump into that. Well, thanks everyone for coming along. Feel free to reach out to me if you've got any questions. These slides, I'll make sure these slides are shared. I didn't really think about how I was going to do that, but I'll send them back to Barry and get them shared. Or I'll drop them in the Slack channel, actually. I'm on the Slack channel, I think, so I'll do that. Thanks, everyone. Feel free to reach out if you've got any questions. Wonderful to spend the afternoon with you. Bye-bye.